I've now got the great pleasure to reintroduce Tim Griffin, who have been already introduced by Julie and me this morning, who has actually been the senior advisor with us on this whole marathon. Tim is editor of Art Forum International. His poetry has recently appeared in such publications as Fence and The Hat, as well as in the volume 3 Radicals, American Poets Before Their First Books in 2004. Tim also lectured last month on the Ugly Duckling Press book Notes on Conceptualism at PS1, and he will now present two things. First of all, a reading of his own poetry. He will then introduce two films which he specially made for the marathon here. One film, a conversation with John Ashbery of last week actually, just before the marathon, and a second film, a conversation with Edouard Glissant, who founded the Institut du Monde and who also in 2007 did a park night here at the Serpentine Gallery in Olafur Eliasson and Kjetil Tausen's pavilion together with Linton Kwesi Johnson. A very warm welcome to Tim Griffin.
As Hans-Ulrich said, I'm going to be reading one poem and then moving on to introduce John Ashbery and Edouard Glissant. A criticism. I like the way you handle your blue, but I think there's something almost hibernating beneath the plastic application which somewhat belies your subject. Which is not to say the round edges don't become part of the painting. I've always thought that photography was a nice material, although it might become dependent. I mean, I've read that book before and I know the feeling. It makes me think that you're trying something. I really like that. In poetry, I've found there are some who also look around for the sake of brevity. I think here you could develop that a bit more. It's a sculpture, right? Make it feel like one. Because the feeling I'm getting is it's something a lot of people are doing. There's nothing wrong with that, but you should be aware of it. Maybe if it weren't black, put it on a pedestal or something. It could be a great expression of today's lackadaisical sublime. I guess that's another matter. Have you ever thought of putting it in a book? Have you ever heard of frottage? You're good when you're big sometimes. I think it's a question of whether you're going to be responsible for abstraction and how far you're willing to go without being too obvious about it. And you ought to know, since you made it. Yet already, there's such a veracity to your color and energy that my eyes are moving. I'm here, and suddenly my eyes are over there. But do these belong on the floor? I'm wondering, do you usually work on the floor? This difference excites me naturally. I love the way it evaporates the design, and the line is almost dimensional. There's so many different visual times at work in your larger paintings. This one is finished, am I right? You're collapsing the scale with another kind of scale, true. That's why I talk about surface and distortion. But maybe I feel that I'm missing something, and there's this kind of assertive reified verve. You shouldn't be nervous when it feels like it's hanging there. There's a limited sense of weight that's part of this experience, and this is not new as a problem to anybody, except it's a direction to take. But I think you're playing it safe. And what I have to say is that your videos show a certain kind of rationality you could use to your advantage in painting, but then an oscillating vocabulary in what you're doing makes me think that I'm seeing a kind of calligraphy of your intentions. You'll need to find a brushstroke for that. And yet, you have a wonderful sense of the monochromatic, because you're not exactly simple. And your great sense of the angle enables the paintings to keep a stake in this, although I think that could be blue and a little less boring. You could also think harder about the element of framing. Don't forget the influence of mounting. Along those lines, while I realize that everybody says two-dimensionality denotes a drawing, it's not necessarily a drawing. It's also sculptural. So what I'm saying is nothing new. My guess is people are beginning to realize that. So you can try to resist reproduction. And yes, you've got me thinking I should narrate my response in terms of the painting. There's an undeniable presence here, which means this is actually a painting. But the element of time involved in that experience is something you will have to deal with. Not in this painting necessarily, since your grand scale implicates the surroundings nicely, and there's an element of stress, which I find myself welcoming as a test. And I like the questions it makes me ask. Am I supposed to drain my reactions? Is this a public experience? Is this a private place? Is it a commodity? Just what is it you're telling me? There's also a spooky element of secrecy. As I was saying, I'm thinking that the sheets have a material quality. When I was walking through the space, I could recognize the silhouettes, the way certain people were standing. I could hear what they were saying, like the blind leading the blind, which is a theme. Am I in a force field of separate parts? Or were you doing these at the same time? You keep it a secret from me, and I appreciate that. I like that dimension. So often people are too ready to forget a painting is a painting, as if art were only a confessional space. That's absurd. But I suppose when you think about it, though, it's even more absurd not to. You have to follow your desires, although I believe in the artificiality of the studio. Because the most important thing is to leave the idea of installation alone. Maybe use a computer to solidify your conceptions. I always say, occasionally you have to know where these pieces are going. But where are you going with this? Because it's different at each instant, and you've got to do it. After all, a subject can dictate its relationship to the ground. You've shown that you have such a handle on all the tools, and it's you who made the piece. But if it weren't you, it wouldn't be what it is, or who you are when you do this. That's what I mean. So I guess I have two things to say about it. There's this flux, a generous attention to everything that nevertheless finds itself wondering why it can't be doing something else. Sometimes that does work for people. I mean, where are we? There's that great saying by Gauguin. But sometimes it's impossible, and you just have to change your materials and deal with the market. Maybe you want me to think of the market. Maybe you just want me to think. That's good too, but it means your color will be the least interesting thing about the piece, as if nature had no rationality of its own. Just a suggestion. Use it if you like. After all, I don't understand why it's so bad to be precious. Now, understand I'm only using that as a word. There's a great opportunity to have drama, a general disequilibrium on an intimate scale. It's a cliche, but nobody realizes it because it's a cliche. You shouldn't have to be afraid of what's absurd. I mean, what great problems to have. The picture is good as a vertical. I also like composition as a way of dealing with things, but I'm not sure what keeps us from taking this farther, except maybe it's never been taken this far. There's a question of authenticity that's floating around, and we have to remember when this was true. This was before the time of Formica even, and the images were out there for anyone to take. That was how they thought about it. And there's such a sense of obsession to you. I just cringe looking at it, wondering if all this is real. But this is a conversation I shouldn't take part in. There's the critic and then the critic's job, which leaves you simplicity. So I agree. Don't listen to me too closely. When you say it over and over, it might become distorted. And there's a sort of comic disembodiment taking place when already there's this atmosphere of an ephemeral space. I have a series of disconnected thoughts about this. First, you could maybe be valuable in a certain area. I think you're right to think that gestures are symbolic. And I'm seeing something of the rhythmic shapes of the spoken, but favoring the literal over the conceptual is a move. And you stay in the same place, theoretically. I say put it aside for a while, and then come back to it. Then draw it again. Then be less deliberate, and loosen your physical vocabulary. Decoration is about the imperceptible, although that's debatable. And it's pleasurable when the decorative ceases to be the decorative. Nevertheless, I like very much the accidents that can occur with this. This piece is exactly what it is. These are basic points, but I'm still conscious of your decision to put it on a canvas. The idea of relearning to look and individuate the moment is a real one. One could confuse the other, or you might separate them. These are the things that are going to happen to us. New delayed experiences, like when we use credit cards, etc. As it stands, I do like the way you negotiate your psychosexual drama. In the encounter of language with the body, I would like to take it all apart. Maybe you want to go elsewhere ultimately. But paint should remain the connective tissue for your ideas. Up close, it's so active, and there are a lot of different things to say. So I'm impressed. Why don't you do 10 of them?